Hello there, Line in the Box here, and this is a tutorial on how to draw a beautiful swan. I will draw the swan inside of Gimp, a free software that anyone can use, but this tutorial works for any drawing medium. So whether you draw along on paper, on Krita or any other drawing software, it doesn't matter. It all works. To begin with, I set up a plain white background and on top of that an empty layer on which I can draw the swan. So the first thing we are going to draw is the swan's head. The swan's head is oval shaped, almost like a long egg or a crocodile's egg. And you might notice that I draw the head tilted diagonally and not in a straight horizontal angle, but angled like this. Swans almost always have their heads tilted downwards. So you're basically never gonna see a swan who holds their head horizontal like so. We're going to draw the head tilted downwards, more like this. Next, let's add the beak. The beak starts at the end of the oval, in the middle of the oval's end. The beak has about the same length as the head, and in the beginning it gets thinner quite rapidly, but right at the tip of the beak it becomes slightly thicker again. Now let's lead the lower side back to the head. Now the lower part of the beak is really thin, it is barely visible. So I'm just gonna add that line below the upper part of the beak. Next, let's draw the eye. The swan, just like all duck-like creatures, doesn't have its eye in the middle of the head, but rather in the upper third. So if we draw a duck the way I used to draw it as a child, you have the eye in the middle and the beak, but actually the head is already oval to begin with, and then in the upper third of the head you have this cheek line that all ducks and duck-like creatures have, and right on top you have the eye. And if I now add the beak to it, it is unmistakably a duck, especially compared to the drawing above. So, if you divide the head into 3 equal parts, the cheek line will be at the border of the upper third. So let's begin by drawing in the cheek line. And the eye will be located right above the cheek line, at about 1/3 in from the front of the oval. Let's quickly add the outside curve of the beak where it connects to the head. And next, we will draw the big black ball that is so typical for the swan's head. I don't know why that sounds so misleading. Well, at least swans don't have 2 balls on their head, otherwise I'd be in big trouble. The black ball is located right at the top of the beak. And next we add the transition from the top of the ball to the top of the head, which is a slightly curved line. Let's color the ball in. And next we're gonna add the triangle that connects the top of the ball with the eye and the bottom of the beak. And we're not going to connect it with straight lines. This triangle will be slightly curved inwards, something like that. And let's fill the triangle in with black, and oftentimes that black triangle patch continues on the lower part of the beak for just a tiny distance. Now let's draw the nostril. The swan's nostrils are very pronounced and visible. And to begin with, you can start by drawing a simple line, starting in the upper corner of the beak. So I bring that line down, and then there are something like 2 black patches below that line. First a bigger one, and then a smaller one. And the entire nostril is black. That's why it's so visible and pronounced. And actually a very important characteristic of a swan, which you can easily forget, however. Next, at the tip of the beak, swans often have a little black patch going upwards. From the front it looks something like this. Or have a look here at the reference pictures. Let's make the outlines a little bit clearer. And I should probably mention that right here, where the triangle meets the eye, the tip of the triangle is about half the width of the eye. So it wouldn't be as thick as the eye, like this for example. Of course, you will always find different types of swans and different shapes and structures, but I'm trying to draw what I consider to be a typical swan. With the head finished, let's continue and draw the rest of the swan's body. Now typically, people will say that swans have an S-shaped neck. And when they draw it, they would draw a literal S shape. However, the curves are not nearly as extreme on a swan's neck. Rather, the curve on the top of the neck is much sharper. And afterwards it doesn't keep bending, it keeps going in almost a straight line until it curves back into the main body. I just realized that I do not have enough place at the bottom for the body of the swan. So let me move it up a little bit. And then let's draw the other side of the neck. Next, I add the outline of the body. This is going to be a fairly simple line since I draw the swan swimming on water. And on the side above, the neck is gonna come down really low, almost touching the water. This small gap is something that all duck-like birds have in common, but the swan in particular, because it has such a long and heavy neck that pushes downwards. Now right at the bottom of the neck, the wings attach, and they rise up like this and fall back down, creating this little shape of a dome. And here at the end, we can now draw the swan's tail, which will lift up like this, coming in from the other side like so, and right at the end, it has this little sharp peak. It reminds me a little bit of Donald Duck's tail. Next, let's add an indication of the wings. The wings actually cover the entire body up to the water, but you're going to see a distinctive straight line right about here. I'm gonna make the transition at the end a little bit smoother. Now the feathers of a swan are extremely smooth and blend into each other. And even though the wings are bent inwards, like any birds, something like that, it looks as if it's only one continuous wing. But since the wing is in fact folded over, you're gonna have big feathers on this part of the wing. And on the second half of the wing, the feathers are way smaller. I'm gonna make the outline here a little bit stronger. And then right here, a little distance before the tail starts, you can oftentimes see the ankle of the swan's foot showing whenever the swan is swimming and not remaining still on the water. It's basically just a little hook or arc coming out of the water. Let me remove some unnecessary lines and trace back the outlines a little bit stronger. There you go! Now we have basically finished the entire swan. And if we want to, we can now draw it cleanly based on this first draft. For that, I create a new transparent layer on which I will draw the outlines. I also reduce the opacity of our initial draft. And now I can draw a clean outline on the new layer. Now that the outline is finished, I turn the first draft invisible, and now we can add some coloring and shading. So I go ahead and add a new layer for the shading, as well as for the coloring. I make sure that the color layer is below the outline layer, and on the color layer, I color the beak in with orange. Now oftentimes you will find that swans have a long black patch on the lower beak. So let's draw that in. And now let's continue with the shading. I select the shading layer and set its blending mode to grain merge. The grain merge blend mode will create a very nice mix to blend the shadow into the image. I go on and start adding shadows to the beak. Next, I make sure that I darken the triangle and the nasal knob. Now I start shading the head, and with the shadows I can really emphasize the smooth and round shapes of the swan. I also make sure to make the cheek stand out a little more. And right here, where the head folds over the neck, you're going to have a really dark shadow on the fold. So, let's quickly think about the lighting situation. I want the light to come from this direction over here, like that. So I will add more shadows to the sides that are opposite to the light source, like the cheek over here and the forehead. Also, if you think about it, if the light is coming from behind the swan, the head will throw a shadow onto the beak. So I will darken the entire beak on this side. Now let's move on to the neck and continue shading it in the same manner. I'm basically just thinking about the shape of the swan, where the light is coming from, and drawing the shadows accordingly. I'm thinking right now that the shadow shouldn't be entirely black, but should have a more bluish tone to it. To achieve that, I create a new folder in the layers tree and rename it. Then I place the shading layer inside the group layer. And now I set the group blend mode to grain merge, because the grain merge blend mode of the shading layer is not applied outside of the group. And now I can set the shading blend mode to normal. Next, I create a new layer which will add the blue tone to the shading. Then I color the entire layer in with blue using the bucket tool. And now I switch the blend mode to my favorite one, the grain merge. Now the shading has this nice blue tone. However, I realized I made a mistake and drew some of the shading on the outline layer. So I'm quickly going to remove all the shading from the outline layer. And now we have this beautiful clean blue shadow. Next, I'm re-adding a few more missing shadows on the shading layer. I don't like the current blue tone of the shadows, so I'm trying out different blend modes. I like the LCH color preset the most. Then I duplicate the blue colored layer and set its blending mode to grain merge. And next I adjust the grain merge layer's opacity until I have a result I like. There you go. Now I'm going to add a few more finer shadows to the feathers. Basically, I simply add a shadow at the bottom of each feather. Also, let's not forget to color in our foot ankle with a brownish color. Then I'm going to create a second shading layer just to add a few more darker shadows. And after that, I apply a Gaussian blur effect to every individual shading layer to make the shadows look smoother. And there you have it, a beautiful finished swan. Now let me show you quickly how to place the swan into a scene. The issue we have right now is that if I remove the white background, we have an empty swan. If you're drawing on paper, obviously you do not have that issue. But here's how to fix it in Gimp. On the outline layer, using the fuzzy select tool, I'm gonna select the entire area around the swan. Then I press Ctrl+I to invert the selection and only select the swan area. That's the area that I want to color in with white. But before I do that, let's have a closer look at the outline. There might be some little gaps between the selection and the outline, which could create little white dots around the outline and which I do not want. So to fix this, I click on Select, Shrink, and here I shrink the selection by 3 pixels to remove any area that exceeds the outline. And with the selection shrinked, I can now create a new layer to fill in the white color. So I do that right away using the bucket fill tool. Whoops, that was the wrong color. Let's undo that quickly and fill it in with white. Perfect. Before I import the background, for more simplicity, I will merge all the visible layers together into one by simply right-clicking any layer and selecting Merge Visible Layers. And now I can simply import the background image I prepared by simply drag and dropping it into the project. Once imported, I simply scale the swan down, mask out the parts of the swan that are behind the grass, quickly draw a dark blue reflection of the swan on a new layer using the brush and the smear tool, and then I copy the swan's layer masks onto the reflection as well, because the reflection is obviously also behind the grass. And there you have it, a beautiful swan in a beautiful lake. And now it's up to you to get things going and get to draw. Obviously, in the beginning you might make a few mistakes, drawing the eye too big, trying to make it look perfect, but don't worry, as with everything, practice makes the master. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. You're more than welcome to leave a like, a comment or to subscribe. And until next time, have fun being a great artist!